green. When it's not, we don't. Now, as far as it being a hotbed now, yes, I think knowing what we know now, the premise of that war was false. So the premise that President Bush went to Iraq with was weapons of mass destruction. When that premise falls, the conclusion falls. It's logic. Now, as far as the complications that will arise in the Middle East, because we stand with Israel, I would say the world is on fire, and the United States should no longer, going to your point, your quote from President Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick. That won't work today. The big stick diplomacy is not going to work today because, number one, contrary and contradicting what President Obama says, America has never been a less respected country in the world. You have to have some existing respect and be the world superpower to carry that big stick. We're not in a time of imperialism now. We're in a time of chaos where nuclear weapons are a great equalizer. And nuclear weapons, when you combine that on some fronts with irrational actors, as Senator Cruz likes to say, rational strategies don't often work because a lot of people in the Middle East are not driven by rational factors. They're driven by madness. In other words, they would be okay with mutually assured destruction. That is not a bad outcome in their book because then they're martyrs. Now, one of the reasons that North Korea has been easier to control is because Kim Jong-un, for all his big talk, which he seeks to retain power and curry influence in North Korea and make sure he gets respect from the people, he is a rational actor. But the folks in Iran, Rouhani, not a rational actor. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so we cannot be signing agreements with Iran, especially when we're not subjecting it to congressional approval, not calling it a treaty, and so that Senate doesn't have to vote on it. That's wrong. And that speaks to another trend that we've seen from President Obama when he spoke to the point about respect in the world, is that he has consistently taken the route of renaming things in order to circumvent the Constitution. So he did this with the Senate recess. Senate's in recess so I can put these appointments in last year. And the Supreme Court overruled him on a 9-0 margin. And this is why I'm saying rule of law is so important. I'll keep coming back to this point. Because with the Patriot Act, which, as we heard, the courts have spoken on that, on Section 215 of that, with the IRS targeting people, with people currying influence by soliciting donations for their foundations, with Obama using executive orders to not enforce the law as written, and then the Republicans agreeing to nominate an attorney general who says, I will not enforce the immigration policies as written. We have a serious problem. And you add to that we have the Supreme Court, which is one death away from a radical liberal majority, that the problem is going to become that rule of law is going to be completely eradicated. So if you don't have Senator Cruz now, and this is getting off topic from your original question, then it'll never happen. This is that breaking point. If you get so far away from the Constitution that you don't even remember what it originally was, as many people don't, but Senator Cruz does because he's an expert in the area, then you understand how critical this is and how dangerous this is to our republic. This is why we have 3 branches of government, and it's become really 4 because the bureaucracy runs everything. And Senator Cruz wants to bring certain things back. Once upon a time, we had a non-delegation doctrine, where we were not letting unelected bureaucrats decide outcomes. Because again, what do people want? Do people want unelected bureaucrats to decide things for our lives? No. And this is again a point that no other candidate is doing anything about that and saying we need to restructure the way our government is, like abolish the IRS in a sensible manner. Now, Rand Paul has taken this off to an extreme because Rand Paul claims to be a constitutional conservative, but alas, he does not understand the implications of what he's saying about the Constitution. And this filibuster that he just had is nothing but politics. It's putting partisan politics above constitutional populism. And the reason that I say that is very simple. Because what the Supreme Court has basically said is that Section 215 of the Patriot Act cannot be done. And what does Section 215 of the Patriot Act say? It deals with collecting metadata. The NSA is taking people's phone numbers and financial records, and they're storing them in these warehouses. Now, I think about 100% of people in this country agree that that's wrong, and most people, even those who aren't attorneys, understand that that's a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights. But we can't just say Fourth Amendment and throw it out there and then expect that to generate a result, which is to oversimplify it. You do have a president, and a president swears that his oath by office is to protect the interests of and security of the American people. That's his job. Now, if you want to talk about power, the Constitution,
you know, if we're looking at Cruz here and Rubio. Now, they have something in common. They're both Latino, Cuban Americans, and this is the first time that that's happened in American history. So now we're seeing Republicans kind of breaking the old white boy, club mold. But earlier in the program, you were talking about how Rubio was for a form of amnesty. Now, what exactly? Because our borders are still wide open, and ISIS has told us that they have operatives in at least 15 states. We do know that there was a Middle Eastern terrorist, Muslim terrorist camp in Mexico, about 8 miles from the border with the U.S. How does Cruz feel? I mean, he's Latino, so how does he feel about shutting down the border on these people?
Okay, if I may, I'd like to just briefly wrap up that point on Senator Paul, and then I will definitely answer your question directly. I was just getting to the point there where I was saying the reason that I say constitutional conservative and that holds some meaning and some weight with me is what Senator Paul has done over the last week. And having this filibuster is going back to 2014. So if Senator Paul had voted and been the 50th vote for cloture, then the USA Freedom Act would have prevailed, and we wouldn't have the position we're in. So what does this issue really come down to? Is everyone agrees, and the Supreme Court has said this section of the Patriot Act is unconstitutional. They recognize that separation of powers means that they cannot use an injunction, in other words, stopping something, as a remedy, because that power belongs to Congress. They can't grant an injunction because Congress has to go back and change Congress's legislation. It's not for the Supreme Court to interpret the legislative intent of something Congress does. That's always been the way it's been, and as per our constitutional structure. Now, so what he's basically allowing is before. So Rand Paul doesn't want to embrace this USA Freedom Act, which is taking half a loaf, if he believes that this is not the right solution, to replace an unconstitutional provision with a constitutional one, something that the Supreme Court has said is constitutional. So what did they say is unconstitutional? This particular section of the Patriot Act. What did they say to do about it? Well, they said, we can't do anything. Congress has to fix it. We recommend the USA Freedom Act. That is constitutional because you can't just bulk store people's data nor collect their financial records without a warrant. And Senator Paul instead quibbles with the way metadata was gathered that way. So he doesn't want you to be able to gather the data as much as they can. He wants you to have each individual warrant for each person to gather that data. So besides being very expensive and time-consuming, it doesn't strike that proper balance between protecting people and our freedoms guaranteed by Fourth Amendment, which are very important. But it's also blatantly dishonest to what he's saying. What he's saying is he's taking that Supreme Court decision. He's saying, look, they were against the Patriot Act. Supreme Court has said this is unconstitutional. We must go further. Except he completely ignored the part where the Supreme Court said, yes, but this part is constitutional. What does Congress have a duty to do first? Not let the Patriot Act continue. Not let the NSA spying continue. So Rand Paul, by not going for this idea, what he's effectively done is gone back to the time, what he's advocating is going back to the time previous to 1972 when we started to rein in our intelligence agencies. What happened then? Well, from 1948 to 1972, what were intelligence agencies doing? They were doing warrantless wiretap by executive orders. So Rand Paul doesn't have an alternative here. He's complaining, and this is where he inherits the problems of his father. Ron Paul was famous for saying, we should be on a gold standard. We should do this. We should do this. And then people would ask him how, and he never had an answer. Never. And that's not similar to, how would you change a policy? He's just railing on this policy. He doesn't have an alternative, and he's misrepresenting what the Supreme Court said to raise money. And he's filibustering on this to raise money, and it's pure populism. It's pure politics, partisan politics. And so I believe that that's dishonest to a level, because Senator Cruz, regardless of his intent, and this goes back to the point about his constitutional conservative roots, when he has policy, Ted Cruz is obviously a populist from everything I've said so far. So why does somebody who's a populist support Citizens United? What is Citizens United? It's the campaign contribution limit. That's freedom of speech. Because Senator Cruz supports that. Why? Because he believes that it's protected by the First Amendment. And it doesn't matter if he thinks billionaires should be able to donate as much money as they want to super PACs. It's what the Constitution says. And if you actually look at his support for Citizens United and his advocacy for term limits and congressional lifetime bans on lobbying after service, they seem inconsistent. But that's because Senator Cruz is putting something, the Constitution, as a touchstone of all policy. And now to quickly come back to your actual question here, is that Senator Cruz, and this brings up one of the points that I like most about him, has the only sensible immigration policy amongst the entire field. And let me say on 2 points. First, Senator Cruz is the son of an immigrant. He embraces the role and champions the role of legal immigrants in welcoming them to the beacon of freedom that America is, the melting pot, and creating economic opportunity. He recognizes that there are a shortage of highly skilled workers in certain areas, like medicine, and that's how a lot of the Indian Americans came over, and engineers and computer scientists who are responsible for building a lot of the Silicon Valley itself. And what they do is they have small businesses, including my own uncle and folks in my family, and they employ people. And they're law-abiding citizens, and these people, a lot of them have master's degrees. So what did he do? He wants to quintuple the number of H-1B1 visas and abolish country-specific quotas on legal immigration. So we as the United States, we have the sovereign power to welcome the very best and most capable immigrants to be part of the best country in the world. So we should have no requirement to take X number from Pakistan. We should be able to take people from any country and however many of those people we want. So that's what Senator Cruz stands on legal immigration, where he's the greatest champion for legal immigration in the entire Senate. So there's no question he's for immigration. Now we get to the second point about closing the border. And closing the border is a matter of common sense, because we need to secure the border, number one, for national security reasons, number two, for the debt reason, because over time heritage projections show it added $6.3 trillion to our debt, number three, for fairness reasons, because when you have legal immigrants waiting in line and who are law-abiding citizens, and the INS stretches its resource to accommodate this mess at the border we have, that disadvantages legal immigrants. That's fundamentally unfair to those who have waited in line and waited their turn. And number four, it undermines rule of law. So Senator Cruz, I think, one time said that illegal immigration increased 92% in 1 year because Obama was basically sending the message, come and I'll let you in. And people heard that message, and they started coming across the border more freely. So we need to send the message to the world that we are a country of immigrants, but we want you to come legally. And if you come illegally, then we cannot grant you amnesty, because what we're doing is completely undermining the rule of law. Exactly. Senator Cruz is a very smart man. He knows that the demographics in the Republican Party, or the demographics in the country, and that how they're shifting. He knows it would be politically favorable to him, but he won't do it because he knows it's wrong.
We're coming to the end of our time here. How can people help you support Ted Cruz and do whatever that they need to do to help support Ted Cruz?
Rod, I will be sharing a link on my Facebook page for how to donate, how to volunteer, and things that they should be looking out for. And I'll leave this tantalizing bit at the end, which is that there'll be a new technology employed, which the grassroots should be very excited about, because it's going to allow people to engage in their communities and whatever parts of the country they are in a way that's never been seen before.
All right, that's well, I appreciate your take on the beliefs of Mr. Cruz, Senator Cruz, and it has been a pleasure speaking to you, Neal. And I hope that we get a chance to actually talk again shortly, and hopefully, who knows, maybe we'll get a chance to actually meet in person as the political process for 2016 really starts to heat up. Thanks for being here, Neal. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Rod. Thank you very much for having me, and have a great night.
Bye-bye. And just take a look at his site, and we'll try to get some information up on the website as well if you want to know more about Ted Cruz. Until then, we'll be right back, folks.